Hi, everybody. It's Jenny Clark with Solvability. We've got another session today of GovCon Summit with the amazing COL Al Mink from Deepwater Point. We're so grateful to have Deepwater Point as a sponsor. They're in Annapolis, Maryland. Bunch of super smart people that have been in military and government for a very long time, bringing all those heads together as a group brain to work in federal contracting. Ariel, marketing, could you please introduce Colonel Mink?
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Today, as Jenny said, Dr. Al Mink will be presenting on the DoD transformation of software development. Al is a Deepwater Point principal who leads our Air and Space Force team. Deepwater Point is a collaborative team of over 300 professionals comprised of former leaders in the federal government and supporting industry. We're committed to accelerate the growth of our clients while also advancing the mission of our government agencies. Al is influential in shaping strategies and winning contracts for firms serving the evolving needs of the Department of Defense. He's held several leadership positions in industry to include CTO and COO of the Systems and Software Consortium, Vice President of Defense and Intelligence for Unisys Corporation, and Business Growth Leader for SRA's International's largest business unit. He was widely recognized for his business acumen, growth, and key wins at these large corporations. As a Deepwater Point principal, he supports both small and non-small firms whose offerings span services, integration, and technology products. Al retired from the U.S. Air Force as a colonel and decorated combat pilot. His final assignment was at Headquarters Air Force, leading the Air Force's portfolio of 13 technology initiatives, a role similar to today's CTO for the Air Force's A6 CIO. Al remains very engaged with DoD and Air Force leadership and issues. He's past president of the Armed Forces Electronics Association, FCA Northern Virginia, and currently serves on the committees of FCA International. In those leadership roles, he leverages his relationships with DoD technology leaders to invite them to participate on panels he often moderates, prepare them for speaking events, and share insights with them related to their organization's success. Al is an advisory board member of the MIT Enterprise Forum, which informs and advises and coaches technology entrepreneurs to start and grow firms with world-changing impact. He co-founded the MIT Alumni Angels of DC, which helps drive investments into the region's technology startups. He also serves on the boards of several of these technology firms. Al teaches a graduate course in technology strategy for American University and has served the Air Force's senior leadership directly as an Air Force adjunct contract professor. Al is a graduate of MIT and Carnegie Mellon University and recently earned his PhD in cloud technology for federal government. And a fun fact, Al is an avid cyclist and rides with the Air Force cycling team annually. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Al.
Hey, thanks, Ariel. So, wow, next time I think I'll submit 3 bullets. I'm passionate about national security, technology, and business, particularly business growth. So that sums me up. I'm here to talk to you today. It's going to be a little techy, but please, the emphasis is not a technical discussion. It's just deep enough so that you can understand the transformation in DoD and software development, because where I want to take the conversation is how this is disrupting traditional acquisitions and how it's creating opportunities, particularly for small businesses. And I'll give you some examples, all the way down to some pipeline opportunities that deal with DevSecOps. So if you're here for like really deep insights on DevSecOps, see me later. I got that PhD and I'd be glad to talk through it. But think of this as a focus on what's relevant to us for business growth. That's what it's about. I have some slides. I'm going to come up for air about slide 9. So I don't know if Jenny mentioned, but if you have questions, what I'd suggest you do is push them into the chat. Just put like the word question at the start of your post so that we can see real quick it's a question. And just as you think of stuff, or if you just have comments, go ahead and post it in there. And what we'll do is we'll respond to those in the chat first. And then if we go through, I'll exhaust all that, we'll talk verbally. All right, so I do have some slides. Are they visible? Jenny, can you see them? There's a thumbs up. Okay, great. So this really is a transformation in software development, a transformation on many indices, not just the tech. So I want to talk to you about them. And if you heard about software factories in DoD, so it's growing outside of Air Force into the rest of DoD and starting to get traction in Fed Civ side as well. That's what we're talking about, these software factories. So I'll tell you a little bit about like why it happened, right? What triggered this dramatic change. It was like a perfect storm. I'll give you some geek talk just to get some ideas on it, but then we'll really focus on how the pieces fit together in DoD for opportunities and specifically strategies for success. So there's the program executive officer, the acquisition lead for the most software in the U.S. Air Force, and that's his statement down there at the bottom. I always like going to the customer first source. So that's our game plan. So it all began several years ago, 2017. Air Force was modernizing its Air Operations Center. It's a weapon system, just like a fighter or a carrier or a tank. So what you see here in Gutter is Al Udeid Air Base, Air Operations Center. It's a combined forces one. You see all the folks sitting at their desks. There's a big screen up here, all the flags, everyone participating. And there's all these different applications, and most of them were kind of client server standalone. They wanted to bring it together and modernize it. So here they are looking at, that was a picture of what was called 10.1, been going on for quite a while. And they led a contract to a big vendor, one that had domain experience in warfighting and IT to modernize. They spent over $500 million on a $2 billion project, and it wasn't going well. And the Air Force didn't want to explain, when it got to over $1 billion, why it was going to fail. It was not a track to success. So they canceled it and set up a pathfinder using this whole DevSecOps approach, this whole new approach to software, which is very transformational. Now, it turns out that there was a commercial firm that dealt with DevSec, DevOps, that had tools and procedures. So Air Force reached out to them, and DoD had just started up a program, it's DIU now, but DIUX, which brought in industry from like Silicon Valley to advise the senior leaders of the Air Force about how to change their tech. So perfect storm. They canceled the program and put it over to mostly small business. So what does this mean in terms of what they did differently? Well, this first row, traditional development, right? They call it the waterfall process. It's kind of like I start with my requirements and I have phases, and I go from one phase with deliverables and I get checked each one. All of us in defense contracting are really familiar with the waterfall. It's nice, contracting likes it because it's clear cut. On the tech side, it's one big stack, usually on site, on premises, maybe hosted in a data center, but usually on site. If someone's really advanced at the time, they might claim they're doing agile. And I want to make clear here that DevSecOps isn't your mother's agile. Okay, so they get the cycle time down from months and years, which was happening, to months and weeks for each new capability using agile. Kind of an N-tier web server, some virtual servers, data center. But what DevSecOps is about is pushing out changes in weeks, sometimes days, significant changes, okay, in an iterative fashion, using a cloud technology of microservices in containers, Kubernetes for those that care, and cloud hosted. In this case, it was Amazon Web Services. Actually, AOC, they used the intelligence community system because it was already up, running, and certified. Okay, so this is what failed. This is what they're doing. And this is the state of art for the DoD today. And this is acquisitions are going to require this type of knowledge across it. Okay, there's my bumper sticker. Agile is not DevSecOps. It's more than that. In a picture, super busy. Don't worry about this. The takeaway here is that the Air Force wants to own the stack and use the commercial clouds and things for the lower parts of the stack and own it. So we used to, in industry, build everything from the bottom up. Now they just want you to work on the app or data layer as a firm. You're going to see why this has great potential for small businesses. Okay. So that's really busy. Another key characteristic, a really busy slide, but I picked it because it was busy. Okay. So this blue line is building software. Plan, develop, build, test, secure, store all your artifacts. Once you have it, like I say, it's a subroutine or a capability, then you deploy it, operate it, you monitor it, and you scale it. Okay, so that's kind of like the cycle. But what you see here is a list of tools and products for each of these steps. And this happened to come out of Cloud One. Each software factory, they're not quite standard yet, but many of them are the same. So your takeaway from this is, depending what the RFP is asking for, everything, both blue and orange, maybe just some of the blue, maybe just testing, maybe just the plan and develop and build. Know what tools they use, because when you bid, your credibility is going to be on having experience with the tools. Okay, past performance that shows it. And for the fielding, Kubernetes through Docker. Most of us in cloud know Docker and Kubernetes. So again, the takeaway is not just I do agile, or yeah, I can use tools, but note that each factory using certain tools for certain phases and being able to articulate that to show understanding. Okay. But even more than just software development, it's kind of approaches to do things. There's best practices, and experience here helps. And having done it before. If you haven't done it, you don't even know what you don't know in the proposal. So for example, there's patterns for developing software, and one of the ones that's common across all the software factories is the strangler pattern. So if we have anybody out here who does software that knows what I'm talking about when I say the strangler pattern, just come off mute for a second and give me a shout. Nope, I'll take that as a pregnant pause. So good, I see it's posted. Thanks, Jenny. So if a lot of the software development isn't a greenfield, like we have this new capability we need, nothing exists, build it. The AOC, for example, you have the legacy system, you had to keep it running, and you've got this new architecture. Old school used to be, even if I have an old one, I'm going to build the whole new system, and when it's all done, I'll run them both in parallel to make sure they work, and then I'll turn off the old one, right? We've all been there. It's a kind of a common approach. It's not true for DevSecOps. They do is they take the old system, they build a proxy across the top of it. So now the user goes through the proxy down to the legacy, and bit by bit, they add new capabilities to the new DevSecOps, and they stop using them on the old one to the point where there's nothing left over here. And the analogy to a strangler pattern is like a tree. You have this tree, like the legacy system, and these vines grow up it, and they start taking over the tree. And the tree eventually dies, but there's now so many of these new vines around it that it continues to stand, all based on the vines around it. So if you strangle the old one, that's what this picture is. Here's a legacy system getting smaller and smaller, right? And the new DevSecOps system, adding the green things each phase, getting bigger and bigger until there's nothing left of the legacy and everything's a new system. But you notice the old one's painted as monolithic, right? Big block. The new one, lots of little blocks. Okay. So far I've talked to give you some technical insight into what's different and realize it does matter. On the technical side, knowing about Agile Plus, right? Stream programming, that's being used. It's not just a Silicon Valley thing, it's used in DoD now. Containers and microservices, we talked about, that's for cloud and putting things in little tiny separate containers, and each one being a little service that you can stand up or take down quickly. Think of them as subroutines. Okay? And then automation, think of it as scripts on steroids. So people aren't having to give all sorts of commands to load something or move it, but rather there's equivalent of scripts with AI that help you in this whole process, move the software around all the way through testing. That's the technical stuff. But this transformation was a lot more than technical. Okay? If it would have just been technical, it would have been easy. And I'm talking to the people who stood up the Kessel Run, that's the Air Operations Center up in Boston. Okay, so for example, old school, Northrop, who was building the AOC, brought people who had worked in their operations center as part of their bid. New school, contractors don't have to know anything about air operations. They need to know about technology, tools, and software. So this really harms large contractors because the Air Force is providing the domain experience and mission knowledge. They actually bring people in temporary tour wearing a uniform who worked in AOC, and they sit right next to the programmer. And the two of them talk about how things should work. And the programmer develops something, it's available the next day. And the airman looks at it and goes, yeah, that's great, but what about this? So they iteratively develop it, all working together. So domain knowledge is a different beast now. Requirements and storyboarding, that's changed too. There's The Air Force struggling a little bit how to communicate requirements, but much more is about storyboarding the requirements. Security, instead of the traditional build it, that waterfall, and at the very end, one of the last steps is wait 3 months to get it accredited. They keep everything on the cloud stack always accredited. And the stuff that you're changing, they accredit that with each release. So it's almost like continuous accreditation, continuous ATO for those that work security. Testing's changed, facilities changed, acquisition methods have changed also. Each is dramatically, I could have put contracting in because contracting had to get comfortable with having a contract that doesn't have specific deliverables. It's more about capabilities. If you think of a factory, what do I need from a factory versus what should the widget the factory makes look like? That was a shift. Old school, define the product the factory makes. New school, can you provide a capability that helps me in my factory? So, okay. I'm going to come up for air here for a second and see if folks have any questions. Jenny, if you want to moderate from the chat.
Oh, I would love to. Here's a great discussion already started with Cordell Roll and Eric Wright. Eric is training residents to be certified in DevSecOps. So he's got the workforce of trained veterans to connect. And Cordell, you've been working in this. Is there a question you'd like to bring up for Colonel Mink?
Not a specific question, but I'll tell you in my own research, when I look at contracts or teaming capabilities, if it doesn't have DevSecOps or Agile Scrum written into it, it's something that I can't fit into traditionally, because that waterfall and the big planning of the Orion or anything like that, that is way, that's not how we look. I love the ability to pop in, take a small component, work directly with the stakeholder. So you're definitely talking my language. That's why I've been excited to come to this unit today.
Thanks, Cordell.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jenny.
Well, I guess that carrying on with what he's talking about, the thing that when I talk to small businesses about the issue, they're saying we can't compete with the big businesses who are basically selling hourly work, maintaining a workforce. And what you're saying is, hey, that's going away because you cannot send a workforce to sit next to an airman.
Mm-hmm. You got it.
And so another thing that I thought was interesting was when you had the slide with all the products up, down at the bottom right, I was like, okay, Microsoft, Azure, Google, Splunk, those things I've heard about. But what I've always felt challenged by is I see talent like companies like Cordell's with what they're doing, but I don't know how to tell them how to fit into the big contracting vehicles. And I think acquisition is the biggest part of those 5 or 6 bullets you've got. Where is acquisition changing, and how does a small business find their path?
Okay. So in terms of what's happening in acquisition, traditionally it's been FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulations, or DFAR for DoD. And some of those will still happen. There's different sections on them. But the huge emphasis is on other transaction agreements, okay, OTAs. And in fact, that's how Kessel Run started with Pivotal, was OTA. So there's also commercial sources. You'll see CSO. That means I'm buying something that is commercially defined, so I don't have to have rigid requirements for it. So certainly tools and products fall along that. But so do some of the quals and staffing. Another one that's being used a lot, and I don't know if anyone here has experience. If you do, please come off mute and chime in. But DoD, led by Air Force, has revamped their SBIR program. So it used to be kind of a bunch of geeks wrote up a scientific paper. Now it's more like pitching to a venture capitalist. And it's centrally funded. So if you have a customer, I'll also use the word customer carefully. Let's go back to the Air Operations Center. You have a capability that could help the AOC at Kessel Run, okay? And you have an idea, you can team with Kessel Run, there's you, with your idea, put in a pitch, and if it gets funded, it's centrally funded out of a pool of R&D, research and development dollars. It doesn't cost Kessel Run anything. So they're there, and even like, no matter how far it goes, it's a reason for you to get to know the customer, explain your capabilities, you know, and you're getting paid for business development, if nothing else. That's actually what a phase 1 is $50,000 just for business development. So in a phase 2, $750,000. So that's a big one. And I mentioned AFWERX, it's Air Force, there's Naval X. Okay, all the services are jumping on this.
Well,
So
I think
good
what you're
point about
talking
acquisition.
about,
If you're looking for GovWin, you're looking for GovWin, this is a real problem for folks that depend on GovWin, because now my observation is at least half of the opportunities are no longer in GovWin.
Wow.
Go ahead, Jenny.
So
I'm
that's
sorry, I'm going to cut you off.
Well, that's a big change. And I think that's where people are really struggling. If I was talking to people this time last year about the SIBR program, they basically were telling me, I gave up. It cost me $30,000 to do a SIBR, and I might get a 10% win rate, and it's a $50,000 thing, and I can't get it to the next level, which is why on Friday, we've got an entire session on innovation with Ben McMartin and Tambourine Bates and Kurt Burton talking about that. And they're specifically talking about changes in the SIBR program, because when the Air Force gives you a $50,000 ticket, that helps you go to the next step. But small businesses don't have the information or agility on how to do it, or they're having to learn the OTA path. So we're gathering that information as part of what we're doing. The other thing is I had to set up the CMMC and the SIBR on Thursday at the same time as innovation. And that's why this community needs to continue, so we can continue the talk. Another person we've got on here is Joshua Rentrop, who I know has won some SIBR activity. And what we want to do is find a way for all of us to work together to let them move forward. So this is a big discussion. And Al, I'm so glad that you're on talking about it. How about keep going with what you're talking about?
Okay, well, we set a good hook. That wasn't, by the way, it wasn't planned between Jenny and me to talk about acquisition, in case you thought it was a blatant plug, but I'm glad you're going to cover it later in the conference. Okay, so we talked about the Air Operations Center as kind of a pilot, got things going. It has exploded. This is just the Air and Space Forces slide of all the different parts of the ecosystem now. So here's that Kessel Run that we talked about in the beginning for Air Force. You find that Warner Robins, if any of you are tracking the huge DCSG contract, right? That's for ISR, analytics and visualization. It's here. If you support Stratcom and the nuclear forces, they have Rogue Blue. If you're into cyber, there's Level Up. Okay, so you've got Space Camp and Kobayashi Maru on the space services side. If you're into logistics, there's Sonacube out at Hill, you know, supply chain, repair, depots, stuff like that. So if you're into, I want to support aircraft like the F-35, Corsair Ranch. So there's all these different software factories. There's one for back-end business systems down in Montgomery. Think of HR, personnel, stuff like that. There's a couple other things that aren't software factories. I'll talk a little bit later on here, but you can, this should give you an idea that all the organizations that are doing software are setting up factories. Okay. And I'll talk a little bit about Platform One, but a lot of them are supported by Platform One.
Wow, Al, this is an amazing list. And the question would be, if I were somebody that was a CEO of a cybersecurity company, I would pick which one kind of I have the most overlaying background, or that I'm closest to, or whatever, and contact them. Or how would I approach this?
Well, a lot of them have Ask Me Anything sessions that you can plug into, okay? Or you can talk to a colleague. I don't want to make a plug for Deepwater Point, but you can talk to someone who works with the different factories, right? Either as a consultant or, in this case, teaming. I'll give you an example of a teaming partner. It's not a client. I picked one that wasn't a client, just a colleague who shared insights with me. So those are the ways to plug in on them. Each one kind of depends on what you consider your skill set for each of these. Again, domain experience is not necessary like Northrop, but if you could, you know, at least say I know what cybersecurity is to work at Level Up, for example, or I know what HR is to work at Bespin, you know, at least you can use some of the same words, but you no longer have to be a big integrator with it. All right, that's the big picture. If you looked at a typical organization, okay, Beach shared, Colonel Beachkovsky shared this with me. So here's an organization, they have their command staff, right? And then they're organized pretty much by what a company would consider a product line. So Lottie, Colonel Lott speak, he does a C2, that's the Air Operations Center for Air. Adam, he runs the platform. So if you care about tools that they use or processes, that would be, in Adam's group. And here's another product line, Wing Command and Control. So there's a big overhaul going on in all the bases to be able to set up command posts that are all cloud-based and they all use the same software hosted in the cloud. So mini AOC in a way for each wing. Chimera and Picard are the names of those two programs. So that's how they organize product line and infrastructure. That's the big takeaway. Sometimes multiple product lines going through the same factory. All right. So I kind of started with Air Force and Kessel Run, as a software factory. But people hear these other things and they often ask, I don't understand all these initiatives and how they fit together. You're not alone. And even the Air Force is struggling to define, like, these little yellow lines that I have here. They look really like great, but there's some discussions. Not everybody plays the same way. Like Kessel Run doesn't really use Cloud One, but Platform One does. So they use a variant of Cloud One, even though there's an arrow going to it. So again, this is why when you're going to do a bid, you kind of need to understand the different elements of it. If that software factory is going to use Cloud One, see if you got quals in Cloud One, or a teammate that has quals in Cloud One. If they don't, then maybe just Amazon skills are good enough. Okay. Another player is called Platform One. And the idea was there were so many software factories standing up, all coming up the learning curve, that the senior leadership of the Air Force designated Platform One to kind of try to set some standards, set up a product list, like a BAA. So if you have a sort of product, and also hire contractors to either teach DevSecOps, to help stand up new factories, and in some cases, even to run the factory. You can kind of see an analogy between the real physical world, doing automobiles or something, right? Not software. And these software factories, some of the concepts are coming back. And so they're using factory concepts. So that's Platform One. Data, there's a big initiative in data called Vault. Eileen runs it and SES runs it at the Air Force headquarters, and they use Databricks and a lot of other different technology. And this is for data and analytics. So if you're doing software, you have a lot of data. How do you handle it? Do you roll your own data solution, or do you link into a Vault technology? So you don't want to know that about the client, because if you pick the wrong solution strategy or don't show the quals, right, in the area they care about, it's easy to bin you off to the side. You get in the off ramp. There's some other things that are going on. This is peripheral, but they're using DevSecOps, digital engineering. So I'll pause again. Anybody out there have insights on digital engineering? It's not a pop quiz. I want to leverage any insights other folks have, because I always learn.
I'm not seeing any questions on, go ahead.
Okay, I want to tell you, one of the biggest pathfinders for digital engineering is in Florida. It's at Eglin. It's the weapons development, smart weapons. They're standing up a software factory and to do digital engineering. The whole idea is to start building physical things with models, and then models of models all together. And not just the design, like we used to think about model-based systems engineering, but also things like costing, reliability, maintenance. And so finally, when you produce it, with terms of aircraft, they actually flew in simulators, right? Using virtual reality. They flew these models before they actually built the first one. They popped out an ET-37 already in the Air Force. There's also a super classified fighter jet that was made this digital engineering way, where they iterated. They copied what Formula One did for NASCAR and racing. So a lot of software. This provides an opportunity for firms with software background, DevSecOps, to sub to what they call the OEMs. I call the metal benders, Lockheed, right, the Boeings of the world, because they need a lot more data and software, and it's all DevSecOps. The new missile system replaced Minuteman III, ground-based strategic deterrence, that's using DevSecOps also, all in part of digital engineering. And across the life cycle, once the system's out there, let's say a new fighter, it doesn't stop. They set up a digital twin and models that really they can compare, and they can do maintenance analysis. So that continues. Okay, another related thing, AFWorks, we talked about the cyber acquisition. Often AFWorks will team up with some airmen or a space guardian in the field who's like working a problem. And the organization that helps empower those is Tron. There's a guy, an airlifter, that set this up. And now there's a support the airmen. So they'll help you team and find where there's some problems that you can help with in Tron. So these are some of the key stakeholders and other related initiatives. So when you do a DevSecOps bid, you know, you might run this checklist and just say, hey, how do any of these matter? If you talk to the client, you know, grab the slide and just say, you know, do you see any of these pieces fitting? So you know what you need when you bid. All right, I've talked about Air Force. How am I doing? I got like 4 or 5 minutes. So let me bring this to a close. My message is this started with the Air Operations Center, and I showed you that slide, how it spread through Air Force, that busy slide. It is now spreading through DoD, and in many ways, FedCiv copies DoD and it's getting traction in FedCiv. Okay, so it is transforming across to FedGov. So if I look at Navy, they have Naval X, which is kind of like AFWorks. They have Tech Bridges for Innovation, ConnectX. And if I looked at Army, I didn't put it on here, but it's on the previous slide, their Futures Command. Here's a funny story. The Chief of Staff of Kessel Run that I talked about was so successful, the Army hired her as a senior civilian to stand up the Army's first software factory. They did that for Futures Command. So that's that picture. They even use a logo of a factory for it. So it's spreading. I don't want to go through each of them because of the element of time, but this isn't just, what I want to paint is this isn't just a flash in the pan or just for a part of Air Force. It's across the board. So I know for at least one of you was at Cordell, you were happy to hear that. So it's there. Okay. So Frank Konetsky just stood down as the CTO of the Air Force. He says, here's what the feeling is. In his words, everyone do DevSecOps. And it says chief even said it, Chief of Staff. Okay. So it's out there, it's real. And all of us in the past, when we've looked at quals for proposals or thought in the PWS, oh, we got to do CMMI. I encourage you to sound out your customer. For some customers, CMMI is a detriment. I'll say it again. Some customers, CMMI is a detriment. So having a big slide of how great you are at CMMI Dev Level 3, find out first what your customer thinks about CMMI before you tout that, because they may think you're waterfall, you're locked in, you're rigid. And again, you get the off-ramp. So some contracting may still want to see it in there because they need differentiators for selection. It's crazy, we're in the transformation, different stakeholders have different views, but just sound out CMMI. Okay, the old thing, if we're CMMI 3 and we've got these great quals, may not be the standard blurb you want to put in your proposal. Okay, what are the types of opportunities? There's products and tools. You saw that slide, but they're always looking for innovative ones. I can tell you a story about testing, for example. So they're looking to use existing tools in new ways because they have special problems. But the big area we care about is services. Lots of different ones in services. Software developers, okay, for software, but there's other services that we talked about before too, like training, testing, security. So a lot of instead of them being bundled, they're taking them, breaking them apart. We talked about how those are being acquired. It's changing, moving from FAR to these other ones. So, and to give you an idea of the pain points, they're looking for help in case you say, well, maybe I don't do DevSecOps fully. I'm a testing person. Here's a quote from, again, PEO Digital, the biggest software developer, about the challenges they still have because of this transformation. So when it comes to teaming, leaders talk about an ideal, I quote it because that's what they call it, ideal acquisition concept. So they're like led by a small business. These are their words, okay? Maybe a large business as a sub to build trust and depth. And maybe a startup or two of something that's innovative, that differentiates you, that you can bring to the fight, right? They don't want to start up priming, but they really don't, it really is anathema for large business. I can't tell you culturally, my concern for large businesses on this area of software is a lot of things that you need the complexity and the domain knowledge of a large business, but for software development, the rules have changed. It's a big push for small business. So that's the ideal acquisition concept, led by a small business, large as a prime, and another sub that's some type of startup with a technology niche that you can bring to the fight. Okay, that's what they've said. So just kind of keep that in mind. This may not be the normal model you see for a team. And the other thing is if you don't have DevSecOps experience, identify a partner with real performance, not just Agile. It says they do Agile. They have someone certified in Agile, but the past performance the Air Force recognizes. We showed you that slide, the United States with all the factories. What factory and what program did they work on, right? That's what you want to drill down to. So I have an example here of a firm. This is Octo, and again, they're not a client, so I use them without a conflict of interest, but they have 3 contracts, 60 FTEs. They're not small, so they can't prime. So they make a great sub for somebody, right? So when they do prime, if it's going to go for a large company, then they want very niche mission or customer insights, like mission planning or targeting that they're going for. So, and then a whole series of insights that come with a firm that's actually walked the walk and isn't just talking the talk. Okay. So here we are, we're finishing up to go to Q&A. What I'm going to leave you with then, Jenny, is just some examples, okay? So first example is DISA, for traction in DISA, just so you know. This is worth a minute. So give me a thumbs up, Jenny, can you see this document? Yep, okay. So Deepwater Point occasionally puts together notes on conferences or customer insights. So we did one on DISA. Major General Brendler was Chief of Staff at DISA. Jana did corporate outreach, and Dave Simpson, Vice Admiral, was the Vice Director. Rear Admiral was the Vice Director. So with this group looking at DISA and having worked at DISA, these were their key takeaways. And one of them was about DevSecOps. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's one of the top 7 biggest things was on the DISA leader's mind. So what I did is I just went down through the notes that Deepwater Point had. Okay, CVR is one of their programs. This is their link back for back-end office systems. As they bring this on across all DoD that this is responsible for, they're going to be using DevSecOps. Okay, so the word DevSecOps in there. You have the Deputy CIO, she's there. She says, hey, we still have challenges, but we're working DevSecOps. That's our goal. And we have a guide, a reference, and we're going to update it because this is what DoD does. By the way, we're having a hard time getting RMF, those in the cybersecurity worked in. I'll just punch down. Well, oh, there it is. One of the SES's own services went through a series of opportunities, right? And it says for development, DISA will use DevSecOps for development. He's got the largest portfolio at DISA. Okay, so it's just those type of things. Here's an example of a specific opportunity at DISA. Okay, this is developing mobile apps. Okay, something most of us could do, most firms. And also had 2 command and control opportunities that are both going to use DevSecOps that are in the pipeline. You can see this one's further out. Okay. So I just wanted to show that as an example when it comes, because at the end, at least for me, it's the bottom line is, show me the money, right? Show me where it's at. So there's that from DISA. This is intentionally hard to read, but this is a list of opportunities from PEO Digital that I mentioned earlier that had DevSecOps in the description. So what we do is we gather at Deepwater Point, we gather our own pipeline, strategic pipeline of opportunities. So you won't necessarily find these in GovWin. If you do, some of the information may differ. I'd suggest GovWin has it wrong if it's different. Okay, but these are all, and they're all in the next year to 2 years, anywhere from 3 months away to fiscal year 2022. So, and that's their total. So it's real money, real opportunities to prime or sub and open for small business. So that's it. I'm pretty much at my time, Jenny, but I'm ready for Q&A or however you want to handle it from here out.
Well, I've got some questions, and I'm really kind of putting these out on behalf of this community because I know one of the challenges they face. Everybody has been told to go after CIOSP4 or Polaris, get on those, and that's where the money is. And instead, what you're saying is, look, focus on these opportunities, but they can only find those opportunities with insight from somebody that's got the depth in that understanding. And so you really opened a door for the entire group on here about what's available, but it's going to take a collaborative approach to reach them because many of them are small. They've been a sub, they don't have prime past performance, they don't have the customer relationships. And maybe they don't know to go after the SIBR program. And there's so many ways that small businesses can have false starts. And I really love your insight on if I was a small business like Cordell or Josh, here's how I would do it.
So thanks. If it was easy, you probably wouldn't be at the conference. We'd all be just growing our business right now. So I get that.
Yeah. So I would just recommend that people, follow up and we start talking about it. Also, the other question that Doc Wright has. So Doc Wright is the guy that's written the book, translating your military into civilian fluency. And Doc, I'd love it if you'd bring up your question. Go ahead.
Thanks, Ginny. So Al, real quick, since I've got one of those experts that we were just talking about. So if I'm training guys and gals for meaningful, lucrative post-service careers and or businesses, that's what I do for a living. We currently just train to the vanilla 8570 stuff, right? Just to get them in the door. They end up with a portfolio of experience. They work on a couple real world projects under executive supervision. They get a couple credentials. So the question is, DevSecOps, I'm an agile guy. I hold multiple agile credentials. We do projects. We try to make every project we can find agile if we can, right? I mean, we know how to use hammers and wrenches and stuff too. So every project's not a hammer, but what credentials do you as somebody in the biz kind of see and go, oh yeah, that guy or gal knows DevSecOps, or at least can speak the language and ask intelligent questions? Are there any credentials and or trainers that you really dig that I could be working with?
Let me make sure I understand this right. Are you talking about like specific alternate credentials or subsets or just different skill areas?
So like,
help me out with your question, Doc.
So let's say I got an E8 airman coming out of Air Force, right? And he wants to do a SkillBridge internship, and he later is going to grow up and be, for one of the contractors on this video call, he's going to be the guy sitting next to the airmen, capturing requirements and giving them real-time prototypes and models the next day or two during those sprint reviews. What kind of credential chops on paper could I get that guy or gal so they have the opportunity to be sitting in that right seat with the airmen?
I got that, but are we talking about specific commercial new credentials, kind of the equivalent of a PMP for program management? Yes. Or are we talking about skills underneath an existing credential that you want to highlight that adds granularity and visibility?
Well, so great question for me. So I guess any certifications, DevSecOps specific certifications, or if I just train them in Scrum.org's professional Scrum Master or Scrum Alliance's certified Scrum Master, are those legitimate enough credentials? Because I really love that slide you showed early on where there's a big distinction now between your mom's Agile and DevSecOps Agile, which is what Mama Air Force is now using. I want the latter. I want specific skilled guys and gals. And to me, the cert says, hey, I have these basic skills. So any certifications that are DevSecOps kind of like signals for the individual,
right. So I would
go work for one of these.
I would go for the DevOps. There's several for DevOps, and we can get together online on that. So DevOps is commercial. So to answer that, and there's some things that are unique to DoD, and clearly the incremental security is part of it, but there's some other aspects like the storyboarding and the threads that go with it that don't have their own cert. So here's a suggestion, okay? Lauren Knausenberger, the new CIO of the Air Force, one of her 3 pillars is digital workforce. Okay, and she talks about building a digital workforce. She is motivated to provide certifications that capture DevSecOps in some fashion, even if it's kind of a more govy. But since it's growing in gov, she's good with that. She wants to lever commercial. So I would see it as a bolt-on. You know, you do a foundation, and then you have a layer on for the DevSecOps twist, right? The Tabasco sauce. This DevSecOps. Part of it's the sec side, the security. So that's where I would go. The other related initiative is DoD is looking to capture credentials of airmen leaving. I use airmen, but it's all services, right? And Mr. Frazier, he's in the A1 of Air Force, is spearheading it for Air Force. They want to know based on experience, not just Air Force AFSC's job codes, the skill sets of everybody based on their experience. So you're going to start seeing coding that has more than just Agile in it from airmen that have programmed to go with it. So they're going to set up their own credentialing system in addition to commercial certs. So, but getting together with Ms. Knausenberger would be, you know, particularly if you do it through a consortium, not just an individual enterprise, is how I would approach it.
All right,
Excellent.
Get her to a round table on this.
So which OTA owns that? Or which consortia, OTA consortia owns that?
The easiest one for her to drive through would probably be C5.
And that's out of Huntsville?
Yeah, actually out of Maryland too. It's Army, but yeah,
Okay.
Huntsville in Maryland. Maryland Contracting Office.
Okay. So this is
out of Aberdeen.
Yeah. So this is the unique insight that comes from collaboration inside this GovCon Summit, because everything you're talking about today, Colonel Mink, also relates to our Thursday and our Friday session, or our Friday sessions. And we really appreciate everything that you've covered. Ariel put in the link how to connect with you on LinkedIn, how to connect with her and follow up. And I definitely think that we've really started a new conversation and a new way to communicate with what you brought with us today. It's been fabulous information, and we thank you very much for being here today.
Love being here. Good sharing notes with you, Doc. Shoot me a note offline if you want to follow up on that. You bet.
Thanks, sir.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and close out because we have another one starting in just a few minutes. So everybody, hope you can be with us and come on into the next one, which is going to be Erica Dobbs with Dobbs Defense Solutions, Kizzy Parks with K Parks Consulting, and Guy Zhuzang, who's the founder of Infinity Technology and has this movie coming out, First to Orion.